I've been asked to talk to you about the planetary boundaries and what they mean for cities. And I should probably start by saying that in fact there is no direct link between planetary boundaries and cities, because planetary boundaries is about looking at the relationships between human activities and the planet as a whole. And of course, cities, as big as some of them may be, do not cover the planet as a whole. But there are no direct connections between cities and planetary boundaries, as I said, because cities don't cover the entire planet, and planetary boundaries is a framework for managing our relationship with the planet as a whole. But that doesn't mean that planetary boundaries are irrelevant for cities, and I'll get back to that in a moment. We've known since we got these pictures back from Apollo 12, this one's from 1972, and I know you've seen it before because I've been told it's the most downloaded picture on the net. We've known that the Earth's resources are limited. And what that means is that when we've used the Earth's resources, we're not going to get any more. And make no mistake, we use the Earth's resources to get rich. We think it's money that makes us rich, but no, money is a proxy for the Earth's resources. Now, despite the fact that we've known that our resources were limited since 1972 from this picture, it wasn't until 2015 that we got an agreement, an international political agreement that acknowledges the fact that our resources are limited. And that, of course, is the Sustainable Development Goals. And really, the Sustainable Development Goals are only a vision for how we want to share the Earth's resources, not only among all the people that are here or will be here in the middle of this century. We believe it'll be 9 to 10 billion people. And that's not because people are having too many babies, it's because we're living longer. So the SDGs represent a vision for how we want to share the Earth's resources. The other thing that's interesting about the SDGs is that there is nothing on this list that we didn't know there was a challenge already long before 2015. In fact, for most of these challenges, we already had a UN agreement for climate, for biodiversity, for women, for water, for peace. I mean, you name it. And there was a UN agreement. So what's new and different here is the fact that we're bringing all of the goals within one framework. And that means it's not the individual goals that are interesting, but the interactions between them. So many cities today are addressing the goals individually when the really important, the hot spot is the relationship between them. And if we want to look at the relationship between them, then we need to start by looking at how they're doing individually. I sat on a group of scientists, 15 scientists appointed by Ban Ki-moon to write the Global Sustainable Development Report in 2019. And we found that actually, for some of the goals, at least before COVID, the global community was on track to meet these goals. But for several goals, the trend was in the wrong direction. Now, as I say, this was before COVID, so some of the goals that were on track have lost track, but the ones that were in the negative, going negative trend, they're still going very negatively. Now, let's look at how the distribution between we're probably going to make it and we're going in the wrong direction looks when you look at the goals. If you will accept to be within 5% of the goal as making it, then you will discover that child mortality, neonatal mortality, getting small children in schools, all of that looks like we're going to make it. And if you'll accept to within 10%, we can eradicate extreme poverty. We can end hunger in the sense that people do get enough food. We can get young people and adults reading. We can get toilets. We can get electricity. So lots of things are going in the right direction. Where is it we have a negative long-term trend? Well, it's actually in terms of ending malnutrition, because we have an obesity epidemic on this planet that's enormous. It's inequality with respect to income. We've gotten to the point now where I think it's 18 people own as much as the bottom 50% of the world's population. It's in terms of our absolute material footprint, our taking resources out of the planet. It's in terms of climate, and it's in terms of biodiversity. So all of these goals the trend is going in the wrong direction. But do we need to worry? I mean, if it's going so well for people, who really cares what's happening over here? And it turns out we do need to worry. We need to worry because everything that happens down here in terms of no poverty, zero hunger, good health, education, all come with costs. And they come with costs to the global environmental commons. That is to say, we're using climate and biodiversity as proxies here because what makes this planet unique and what actually gives us the conditions we enjoy on Earth is the interaction between climate and living organisms. So here we have the Earth's resources, here we have people getting richer, and it's coming at a cost up here. Now, at the moment, we're in a position where in a country like Denmark, where I live, if everyone lived like us, we would need 4.2 Earths in order to be able to develop, or in order to have that standard, that life standard. So sustainable development is lying in here in this tension space between the global environmental commons and the increase of well-being of humanity. And the most important goal, number 10, is all about equality, is a question of how are we going to share these resources among 9 to 10 billion people. Now, many of you will note here that I don't have all the goals on this list yet, but that's because all the rest of the goals can be assigned to one or two of the tools that we have in society to release the pressure. Right now, it's clear we don't know where we want to be, but if we're too close up here protecting the environment, then there's no room for humans to develop. But if we're too close down here, then we end up in a situation where we lose our natural capital, that which is paying for the party. And we can party as long as the bank account, the sum on the bank account is falling, we can continue to party for a while, but we can't party forever. And that's exactly the situation we're in right now because the bank account on our natural capital is decreasing. So we have these four tools: science and technology, economy and finance, governance, and individual and collective action that together can help us reduce the pressure here. And people say, oh, well, technology, we have to have a solution. If we just get a solution, that isn't going to work. In fact, if you look at it, the intensity, the carbon intensity, the amount of CO2 that's emitted for GDP, per GDP, has decreased by about 40% since the middle of the last century. And yet we're still in a mell of a hess with respect to climate. The situation's much worse than it was 50 years ago. So technology alone can't do it. It has to be technology combined with our behavior, and we can use economic and government tools in order to get the match to work. So in terms of living within the Earth's resources, we need to know how many there are. And that's what we use the planetary boundaries for. In the planetary boundaries, we acknowledge the fact that the Earth behaves as a system. It's a system where physical, chemical, human, and biological components together create the conditions that we have on Earth. And this is interesting because when I started in this science many hundreds of years ago, we had humans in a box out on the side, and then we had the Earth here. But the humans aren't outside the Earth system. We're a part of it. Not only are we a part of it, but our activities can influence it at the global level. Now, we think of this often in terms of climate, but there's lots of other processes that we're impacting at the global level. Here you see 12 figures that all start in 1750 and end in 2010, and they also all show socioeconomic trends or what's happening with human societies. And you can see there's world population, world GDP, direct foreign investment, population, and so on. So you've seen this tremendous exponential increase since 1950, which is done in red here and with the dotted line. Now let's go over and look at the Earth system and what we can see there. Well, here we have three different greenhouse gases. Here we have the ozone hole. Here we have temperature at the Earth's surface. Here we have acidification of the ocean. More CO2 in the atmosphere means more CO2 gets dissolved in the ocean, and that makes carbonic acid. Catch of fish. This one's very interesting here, where we remove mangroves in Southeast Asia and do aquaculture for tiger shrimp, so we can all go down and buy them for dinner tonight. This is coastal anoxic events because of extra nitrogen coming from our sewage treatment and from our agriculture into local waters. This is the loss of tropical forests. This is domesticated. The transfer or the change of wild nature to farmland. Right now, we're using about 40% of the ice-free land on this planet. We're using for making our food, and about 80%, that is to say, an area that is the size of South and North America together, we are using to produce meat or food for meat. And here you see the loss of biodiversity on land, and we don't even know what's happening in the ocean. Now, clearly there's a correlation here. Correlation in itself doesn't show cause and effect, but we do know that every single case here, it's because of human activities. So we need to know, how much can we affect, how much can we use of the earth? What are the boundaries, the planetary boundaries for what we can use and still remain in a safe operating space? Now, politicians have said, okay, we can accept a 2-degree temperature increase, but what about all the rest? So that's what we do with the planetary boundaries. And we've had 3 different papers that have come out at 3 different times here. And basically what we say is, okay, we know for certain that humanity can thrive in the conditions that we have now. We know nature can change these conditions by throwing a meteor at us or whatever, but we believe that humans can as well, and therefore we need to find the limits to what humans can. And if you think about the system you know best, it's your own body. And if you break your leg, the doctor may be able to put it back together again, but it'll never be quite as strong. There's been a state change in the system. We know from ecosystems around us, if you have a lake which is perfectly clear and the light comes down to the bottom so the plants can grow, and then you put nutrients in, the water gets all murky, and the plants at the bottom don't get light and they die. Then you take away the nutrients. Do the plants come back? No. Where should they come from? There's been a state change in that ecosystem. And we see this all the time. Here's the picture with the clear water and the turbid water. That can happen because of something entirely natural, but it can also happen because of human activities. Likewise, coral reefs going from coral to algal dominance, grasslands going to shrublands. So we accept that in ecosystems, it can be either nature or humans that change the state. What about the Earth? Does it have different states? Well, of course it does. This is the temperature of that's over Greenland. It's a Greenland ice core from Greenland ice, which shows that the last 100,000 years, the Earth has had a really rocky road. And these big jumps in temperature here, they're about 10 degrees. It's just a proxy for temperature, but it's about 10 degrees. So huge changes over short time. Our ancestors were here on this earth at that time in our present biological form. In fact, we were here from 200 to 250,000 years ago, and there were about 10 other humanoid species in this period. All of the other species died. Ours went down to very few numbers, but we did get through the eye of the needle. What's interesting is, biologically, we could have made huge modern civilizations long before we did, but everything that we consider to be modern, that occurred here or developed here in this period that we call the Holocene, the last 12,000 years. And what this means is we know for certain, and this is where humans really took off. So we know for certain we can thrive here. We don't know if we can thrive in other conditions. So we analyzed, what is it that keeps the Earth in these conditions? Well, of course, obviously it's the relationship to the sun and how we're circulating around the sun. But the people who study that say that that's not going to change in the next 15,000 years or so. So we don't need to worry about that. Well, obviously, climate change is one, but the ozone layer as well, particles in the atmosphere, ocean acidification, freshwater use, chemical pollution, land system change, going from forest to farmland, biodiversity, and extra nitrogen and phosphorus in the system. So we identified those as planetary boundaries and said, these have huge human pressures. We have to decide, how far can we go here? Now, I should be very careful here and say I'm sorry we called them planetary boundaries, because people assume that means threshold. And many people say, oh, look, we're on the wrong side and we're still here, so it can't mean anything. Think of it more like blood pressure. If your blood pressure is over 120 or 80, it's no guarantee you're going to have a heart attack, but it increases the risk. We also identified that there are two core boundaries, the two things that are really interesting here. That's climate and biodiversity, called biosphere integrity. But that's just because it's not just a question of how many species are there, but who's there and in what numbers. These are the most important because it's their interaction that creates the conditions on Earth. And everything, all the other ones we're interested in, they operate either through climate or through biodiversity. So we really worry about climate and biodiversity. Now, here you can see our conclusion from a 2015 paper. For biosphere and for biodiversity, we're on the wrong side of the boundary. The boundary's in here. If we can stay in the green, we're in a safe operating space. Climate change, we're on the wrong side. Felling of forests, we're on the wrong side. Release of reactive nitrogen and phosphorus, we're on the wrong side. In the 1990s, we were on the wrong side for ozone. But then we got the Montreal Protocol and went back in. So we have a precedence for being able to do so. Now, you can use this also in a city's context. Here it's used in an agricultural context where you go in and these people looked at the effect of agriculture. And you can see we talk a lot about agriculture and climate, but agriculture alone is responsible for about 80% of the biodiversity loss that we see. So agriculture alone brings us on the wrong side of the boundary here. Felling of forest, these people think we're on the wrong side for water as well, but nitrogen and phosphorus, that's for agriculture. Cities, of course, are much different. In cities, you're in the lucky situation that you don't have a lot of forest to fell, so you can't do much there. It's already been done, and the same with biodiversity. In fact, you can do something positive for biodiversity now, and there's not a lot of agriculture, so you don't have nitrogen and phosphorus boundaries to worry about. But you have infrastructure, and you have CO2, you have waste, and you have to worry about fair access to resources. So I believe that the planetary boundaries can also be used as guidance in a city's context. Basically, what I'm trying to argue is that our sustainability challenge is a question of developing the tools and mechanisms to share the Earth's limited resources among 9 to 10 billion people. And I'm pretty certain if you ask the guy beside you, or if you go out and ask anyone on the street, what do you think of sustainable development? They will say, oh, I think it's a good thing. But then they'll probably continue and say, but I'm glad that someone else is worrying about it because I have something more important to do. What could be more important? Development. Who is it that doesn't want life to be better for their children or grandchildren than it is for them? Not necessarily in terms of material goods, but in terms of health, in terms of leisure time, in terms of prosperity. Sustainable? That just means that it can continue as far as the eye can see. And as long as our balance on our natural capital is going down, then that can't be said to be true. So what could be more important than sustainable development? Sustainable development is not a nice to have, it's a need to have. And it's far too important to give somebody else the job or the responsibility to make sure that it comes. I do a lot of consultancy work about the planetary boundaries, among other things, for the Danish industrial organization. And in that connection, we had a visit from John Elkington, who many of you will hopefully know is the person who developed the triple bottom line for 25 years ago. And he's completely enamored of these sustainable development goals. And in order to have the sustainable development goals, you need to know if you're going to share, if they're to share resources, you need to know how much you have, and therein come the planetary boundaries. But he's completely enamored, and he calls them a purchase order from the future. It's quite obvious to me that all of us, cities and elsewhere, have a responsibility to deliver on that order. It's also very obvious that business as usual cannot deliver on that order. Thank you.